Good evening. My name is Christy Keeler, and I am the local sales specialist that works with Farmers Cooperative in all of their locations across western Arkansas and eastern Oklahoma. Tonight, we are here to talk about wildlife management. With that being said, if you guys are joining us, want to let you know if you're in via the Zoom platform, all of your lines have been muted. And if you guys have any questions and you're joining us from Zoom app on your mobile device, a little bit to let you know, go down here to the bottom right-hand corner, click more, click chat to drop your questions in, and we'll address those at the end of our live feed tonight. As well as if you're joining via your computer, if you could drop those questions into our chat box, myself and other folks within the Farmers Cooperative locations will be keeping an eye out for those. If you're joining us live tonight on our Facebook stream, please drop any of your questions into the comments section and we'll be monitoring those as well. So with that, I would like to introduce the Purina Wildlife Specialist, Scott Hohensee.
Thank you, Christy. Appreciate you and Karen putting all this together and getting everybody on to talk about deer here this evening. And we're going to spend a little bit of time here today talking about developing a successful feeding program on your property for white-tailed deer. And I think that's why everybody's on tonight, is because you like big deer, you like to watch deer, and they're really neat animals that a lot of people, spend a lot of time with, and it's just a fun hobby to have. So around the idea of supplemental feeding, there's a lot of ways you can do supplemental feeding, but tonight we're going to talk a little bit about some tips and tricks and things that I've learned over the years to help you have a successful program. When it comes to feeding deer, it's not an easy project. So when you do it, you want to make sure you spend your money wisely and get the best return you can. Go ahead and flip the slide, Christy. When it comes to supplemental feeding of deer, sometimes people ask, well, why do we want to do it? Well, obviously, the first thing that comes to everybody's mind is bucks. Everybody likes big deer, big antlered bucks. And that's one of the main reasons of a supplemental feeding program. But also there's other factors that come involved as well outside of antler development. You got to think about your does. Proper doe nutrition all year long is very important. Like right now, we got fawns on the ground. Those does are nursing. So that's really important. Here coming up, those fawns are going to start growing faster and faster. And then plus come the fall, those does are going to wean those fawns as well. And so there's a lot of benefits of a year-round supplemental feeding program. Next slide. One of the questions that I get asked a lot when it comes to starting out on a supplemental feeding program, if you've never exposed these deer to pellets before, it's kind of a little bit of a learning curve. We got to teach those deer what those pellets are. And how we do that is you go get a supplemental feeder that we'll talk here about in a little bit. But one of the things you want to do is mix a little corn with that feed at first. One thing that you don't want to do is fill that protein feeder up with pellets. That's probably the worst thing you could do. The best way to do it is get your protein feeder out there, put about 3 or 4 bags of Antler Max, about 3 or 4 bags of whole corn, mix it basically 50-50, and then let those deer kind of eat that through. They're going to go in there and look for that corn in that feeder head. And once they find that corn, then they're going to taste those pellets and they're like, oh man, this tastes good. So that's how you kind of get them on it. And then you wean out the corn over time. That corn can get weaned out over 30 days. I've seen ranches where we worked for 6-8 months to get that corn out of there and get those deer on pellets 100%. It's all going to depend on what else those deer, have to eat. Next slide. The question that gets asked is, well, how much are these deer going to eat? Well, there's a lot of factors that determine what those deer are going to eat pellet-wise. Number one is obviously what other vegetation is on that property. Is it a property that's managed properly? It's got a lot of native deer habitat or their food plots and so forth. Because you got to remember, supplemental feed is basically a supplement to the native habitat in a wild situation. It's not a complete feed for those deer. Those deer are going to be browsing on everything that they like on that property, and they're also going to get just a little bit of added benefit from the supplemental feed. A couple of things that are going to affect that also are the number of feeders you have on your property, the feeder type, which we'll talk a little bit about in a little bit. If you got feral hogs on those properties, a little bit about pen sizes around those feeder stations, where those feeders are located, and things like that. Next slide. First, I want to talk a little bit about actual protein feeders. You know, there's a lot of great protein feeders on the market today. There's a lot of great companies that produce great feeders. And a couple of things you got to remember when you're out there selecting for those feeders. It's one of the things that I like to say is probably really important is the feed head on those feeders. You can see here on the screen, there is a 2,000-pound protein feeder right there on the screen. You can see those heads come out between the legs where a buck can get in there and not damage his antlers and velvet. So that feed spout is all the way out. But probably more importantly, that deer can walk up to that feeder and get a bite to eat and see what's going on all around him. Deer do not like to walk up and stick their head into a hole or up to a wall where they can't see. You know, deer are nervous creatures. They're always concerned somebody's going to get them kind of deal. So a feeder like that right there is perfect because it's the peripheral vision is not obstructed. Another thing on selecting the right feeder that I've learned over the years is go with at least 1,000-pound feeder. Probably stay away from the smaller 300-pounders because what you're going to learn over time is once those deer start eating the pellets and you get your program going, if you have a really small feeder, you're going to spend more time driving out there filling it up, and your labor is going to get expensive versus having a larger capacity. So go with 1,000 or a 2,000-pound feeder. And just because you buy a 2,000-pound feeder does not mean you have to fill that thing up with 2,000 pounds of feed. You're going to grow into it over time and save money on that right there. Another couple of tips too is like if you got really sandy country, try to get you a feeder that's got skids on it. So number one, it doesn't sink in the sand on one side, but also probably more importantly, you can drag those feeders around once a year to a new location with fresh soil underneath those feeders because they will get contaminated with pellets over time and it rains on it and things like that. And then also, if you're in an area that has a really high capacity of deer density, you might even consider those 3,000-pound feeders. Next slide, Christy. You know, question we get asked a lot is how many feed stations do I need on a property? That's going to depend on basically how many deer you're going to try to feed. And what I hear a lot of times is folks just simply don't know how many deer they have on their properties. So kind of a rule of thumb that we have come up with some research years ago with Dr. Varner was you can only feed about 20 deer in a night at one protein station. So kind of like the rule of thumb of a balance between one protein station to every 20 deer on the property, or if you know you don't know how many deer you have on a property, one feeder to every 100 to 200 acres is sufficient. What you want to remember and what you want to accomplish is, I think is very important in this game, is reduce the stress of your deer at a feeder location. And what I mean by that, the more feeders you have on a property is not necessarily going to mean the more feed you're going to feed. But what it does, it disperses those feed stations out where those deer can get up and walk at any time the same amount of distance to the nearest feeder location, but they don't have to get in line to go up there to eat. What I mean by that is, for example, this time of year, those bucks are in bachelor groups. You'll see a bachelor group walk up to a protein station, but the pecking order of those bucks, you might have a couple bucks at the bottom that never get to go eat because once the bachelor group starts to walk off, those deer go with the group because of that social order. So just something to think about when you're putting out your feed stations. Next slide, Christy. If you got these guys at your feeder stations, then you're definitely going to have to put hog panels around them to keep those hogs out of your protein station and consuming your pellets. So next slide, we're going to talk a little bit about how to build the perfect pen around those feeders. One of the things we've learned over the years to efficiently feed these deer inside of a pen, basically it's hog panels in a circle that keeps the hogs out, but lets the deer get in and socialize, go through their pecking order, and being able to eat, is make your panels or make your pen sizes at least 60 feet diameter. That's basically get 12 of the 16-foot hog panels in a circle, and you've got that accomplished. Kind of keep the feeder towards the center or the center third of the pen, so the deer have access to roam around, and not get obstructed with anything. Also, keep those pens in a circle instead of a square. That way, those deer can run around and hop in and out rather easily instead of a square pen, more of a boxing ring kind of scenario, where a deer could get cornered in a corner. Versus a circle, they could just run around the corner of those panels and jump right out. But again, as I said before, reducing the stress is the most important thing when you're thinking about these pens. Next slide. This next slide right here shows what you don't want to do. This is a very, very small enclosure. I think I counted it up one time. It's 5 or 6 panels in that circle pen right there. And deer do not use that very efficiently. Deer do not want to jump into what I call a bucket where they don't have room to interact and move around. So if I was feeding deer compared to that image right there of that pen size versus one that was 60 feet across, you're going to see a lot better consumption at your pens with 60 feet diameter space. Next slide. As far as protein feeder placement, where do we put these feeders? What I tell folks is try to keep them evenly distributed on the property. Now, that's going to depend on how big it is. Very, very large properties, sometimes it's not economical to try to do that across the whole ranch or the whole property. So wherever your deer hang out the most is kind of where you want to have that feeder distribution. Obviously, you want to keep them off the fence lines. You want to keep those deer on your property, and keep them near a water source and cover is really the main thing you want to remember. That is probably going to get you the furthest. And that leads us into the next slide, where when you're out there placing these feeders, is what I tell people is think like a buck. A buck all year long thinks about 3 things: water, food, and cover. Except during the rut, obviously all bets are off. But if that buck is going to lay in the shade for the most of the day and get up and get a drink of water and get a bite to eat, you might as well have that protein feeder right there in that bedding area and close to cover, so you can get all 3 things accomplished pretty easily. Next slide. One thing also that I've seen a mistake a lot is people take a protein station and put it out in the middle of a food plot. That's probably the worst thing you could do. You want to keep these protein stations off in the brush or in cover, about 100 yards outside of those food plots. And then the other thing too is on those food plots, another little trick is keep edge effect in there, what we call leaving some strips of vegetation. Well, those deer don't have to walk across a big opening. They always got a little bit of cover. Next slide. Another thing that ask a lot is, should I go bag or bulk? And what I mean by bulk is bulk truck, overhead bin with the feed trailer. That's what I'm referring to in regards to bulk. When it comes down to between the two of buying a ton at a time in bags or a ton in bulk, you're not going to save a lot of money in regards to the actual price of the feed. Where you're going to save money is in what is your labor worth to you. I mean, you want to go to the ranch and spend all weekend filling feeders with bags, or do you want to go bulk with the blower trailer and get it all done in 2 hours? That's the kind of thing where your savings is going to come into play. Next slide. A lot of our customers use overhead bins, and believe it or not, we get a lot of questions with new landowners of, where do I get this bin, but where do I put it, and some things they need to think through. A lot of our customers might not come from the ag industry, so they just don't know these things that we take for granted. So a couple of things that you can do to help them out is, when you're buying an overhead bin, my opinion is to get a 30-ton bin. A 30-ton bin is going to allow you to accept a full load of feed if you ever get to that capacity. Our trucks are 22 to 24 tons, so you can have a little bit of feed left but also get another load of feed without running out. Another easy tip too is get a divider in those hoppers. That's going to allow you to have two different products in that bin. You can get a divider and a hopper, probably 1,500, 2,000, depending on the manufacturer. So it's a real easy add-on to your bin purchase. And then also keep those things in all-weather road access where we can get in there with our trucks if it's raining and things like that. As far as feeding for specific times of the year, a little touch base a little bit on that is, in the spring and summer, we basically have antler growth and we have does lactating. That's kind of what goes on. Then in the fall and winter, we have body condition is what we want to focus on because antler development's over, but we're working on keeping those deer in the best shape we can, both bucks and does. And next slide. A lot of people ask us, go ahead and one more, Christy, ask us, what should I feed during what times of the year? Well, it's really very simple. You really have about two options. During the spring and summer period, the first option and your best option is going to be the Antler Max Deer 20. The Antler Max Deer 20 is a superior product that you want to feed basically from January through August. It's the product that's going to have the bypass protein technology in it. It's going to have our mineral package technology in it. And it's also going to have climate guard, which is going to help get those deer up during the heat of the day on heat stress and go to those feeders in eat when it's critical for antler development and doe lactation. And then your second option during the spring and summer is going to be the Antler Advantage Deer 20. That's basically a step down from Antler Max. It doesn't have the bypass protein technology or the climate guard in it, but it is a great feed. It's going to have a mineral package that's designed for growing antlers and things like that. So don't discount it, but it'll save you a little money over Antler Max. It'll save you about $1 a bag, ballpark, 75 cents to $1 a bag savings. And that's what you also would feed from January through August. Next slide, Christy. And once we're going to be done here with antler development in about the next month, then we totally switch gears in the deer world. We go into what you see right here is basically the rut. These deer are gearing up for the fall and winter period. Those does are weaning those fawns, and these bucks are, they're getting ready to start the breeding season. So when that happens, your deer on your property are gonna eat a lot less. Those bucks are gonna lose up 30% of their body weight. Things just change dramatically out there in the deer world. So what that tells us is, next slide, Christy, is we got to start to be thinking about what we need to do to help those bucks keep that weight on. They're not going to go to those feeders very often. Your consumption is going to be way down, but we want it every time they take a bite out of that feeder, it's going to help them with body conditioning. That's where the product of Antler Advantage Rut Conditioning comes in. And we also have an Antler Max version of rut conditioning as well in certain parts of the country. But this product right here is all geared about body conditioning and reproduction. And it's a 4% fat feed, so it's going to help those bucks and does. So we'll feed that through December or through January, and then we'll switch back over to Antler Max Deer 20. Next slide. And one thing too, you got to remember, folks, everybody here on the call, is you're here and you're still watching this because you like big deer. But what you got to remember is there's no magic bullet out there. What I tell all my customers and my prospects is we're only going to maximize the genetic potential of your deer. Yes, we can help you raise some big deer, but we're only going to be able to produce the antlers that deer genetically can produce. So there's no magic beans kind of deal. And that's just kind of, being upfront with everybody. But that right there kind of is just a little quick thing in regards to, some tips and tricks of setting up a supplemental feeding program on your property. And, if you guys got any questions, I think Karen and Christy are taking questions. But also, feel free to reach out to the dealer. If you got a large property or need some help with it, we'd be glad to help you out with you and talk on the phone and things like that. We got a great team that knows a lot about deer and various parts of the country. So we're here to help you guys, do whatever we can to raise the best deer we can.
So Scott, got a couple of questions that have popped in here. Is that, so What determines our selection of our deer feed? Is there something particular? Because we at Purina, kind of make a lot of different deer feeds. I mean, what helps you make that determination when you're out there with your deer customers?
Well, one of the things, like if you were doing what we talked about this evening, the Antler Advantage or Antler Max Deer 20 is going to be the most popular one. Now, if you've got things like exotics on your place, we've have deer rations that are geared a little bit more towards exotics, or if you've got exotic sheep species, or all those things, it can get really complicated quick, but we try to keep it easy. And majority of our business is going to be those two products during the antler development period.
Okay.
But we'd be glad to visit with you on one-off scenario if you have a unique situation with some exotics, or a particular situation that's not normal. We can help you figure out the best feed.
So in regards to blocks, we at Purina make the deer blocks. What are your recommendations of blocks versus pellets?
On blocks, we have an Antler Max Deer block, which is basically the Antler Max Deer pellet compressed down into a 33-pound block. Blocks are great. If you can't feed pellets, the blocks are better than not feeding anything. But one of the things you got to remember, blocks are more of an attractant kind of deal, because a deer is going to have to consume probably about a half a pound of pellets a day to make a nutritional difference in antler development. So you can't get that kind of consumption off of a block. Block's going to be a hard object. They're going to have to nibble on it a little bit. You're just not going to get the consumption that you need to make an antler, to make a difference in antler development. So that's why pellets are the best route to go.
Okay. In regards to antler development and thinking about deer mineral, what are your recommendations on deer mineral?
We've got an Antler Max Deer mineral that's a granular mineral you can pour out, along a deer trail or water source or things like that. But what I tell people, if you're feeding a good product like the Antler Advantage or the Antler Max product, there's no reason to put out additional granular mineral, because those minerals and vitamins and minerals are in the package already. So there's no need to do that. Now, if you want to put them out to put them out, yes, it's not going to hurt anything. But you got to remember, there's really been no research papers proving that putting out mineral by itself is going to help you raise, big deer. They got to have the proteins and things like that from a pellet versus just a mineral site alone. And plus, the consumption will probably be minimal at a mineral site as well.
Okay. So I had one other one in regards to our extreme energy feed. Can you talk a little bit about that for us tonight?
Absolutely. Extreme energy is a feed additive. Okay. It's not a whole feed that you just pour in a feeder and walk away. It's a 30% fat product. So extreme energy is designed to increase the fat content of an existing feed pellet. So out in the wild, our customers, what you do on extreme energy is you put out one bag of extreme energy to 40 bags of deer pellets. Like in a 2,000-pound feeder, you put your 40 bags of deer pellets in there, and then one bag of extreme energy. That's going to raise the fat content up almost 1% on the fat level. Now, if you're feeding confined deer, breeder deer, things like that, it's a different feeding rate. The feeding rate in that scenario is going to be a half or quarter to a half a pound per deer per day, which comes out to about 25 cents per deer per day to feed it.
Okay. One other is that there's some folks that might be putting out some salt block. Would that salt block affect the a good deer feeding program?
I wouldn't recommend a salt block. They're going to get, like I said, everything they need through the pellets kind of deal, but it's not going to affect the consumptions on the pellet program. Just a block. I mean, they're going to use it minimally unless there's a scenario or a situation where there's just a lack of salt in the soil on that property. Something really, really strange in regards to minerals, but it's not going to do much.
Okay. And then we got something talking about wanting to know about recommendation of deworming our deer. Is there anything that sets out there that they could get their hands on? And
Yes.
what would that look like?
There's a product called Wildlife Dewormer product. It's an off-label product that you know, you need to work with your vet on. But basically, it's got the active ingredient of fenbendazole in it. So you would deworm your deer twice a year, springtime and the fall period. The feeding recommendations are on the bag, but it's basically 3 pounds to 100 pounds of body weight. But it's a great thing to work with your vet on and incorporating that into your program. But it is an off-label product.
Okay, perfect. Well, with that, at this time, we don't have any more questions sitting in the chat box, but I would like to kind of bring up a couple of things for those of you guys that have joined us this evening. If you pull out your cell phone and you text 95323 and in that body put Purina, that will then send over to you a text message with a hyperlink for your eligibility for a $10 off coupon. You would want to select Arkansas. Then that'll feed you into tonight's meeting, which would be the $10 off Farmers Cooperative Wildlife. Then it'll send you an email with that $10 off coupon. I do want to note that this coupon submission is only available for 2 days. So that would end on Saturday, August the 1st. So also appreciate Scott joining on tonight. He's going to be back on our platform in September. And we're kind of walking through a lot of virtual meetings as COVID restrictions have been in place. And we want to keep you guys safe and keep everybody, you know, healthy as possible during these uncertain times with COVID. With that being said, we've got some more meetings coming up in August. We've got 2 cattle meetings that will be at 7 p.m. And we've got an equine meeting that will be in August. And then we're going to bring in Dr. Michael Slagle and to talk about feeding our aquatics. So you guys can jump on the Farmers Co-op website for the entire list of platform that we've placed together. Every one of these are going to be at a 7 p.m. Time. And all of our cattle meetings will be on a Tuesday. So it'll be every other Tuesday. And then the equine, aquatic, and our wildlife will be on Thursdays. So check that out. Keep an eye on our Facebook account as well, as we will be keeping this updated there. If you go on to the website and register and watch us via Zoom, you will get entered for a chance to win one of 2 $25 Farmers Co-op gift certificates. And I've got a chat question here that I've just been informed of. Let me see if I can bounce there real quick. Absolutely, Rebecca. You were thinking exactly where I was getting ready to go to. So I will get to the bottom of this. Bear with me, folks. Is once again, is to receive the $10 off coupon, please text Purina to 95323. A hyperlink will come across. You would want to select Arkansas, as we are broadcasting for Farmers Cooperative and all of their locations across Western Arkansas, Eastern Oklahoma, and then select $10 off Farmers Cooperative Wildlife. This coupon will be available for 2 days and will end on August 1st. So I will leave this back up here. Let me double check our chat box before we depart here this evening. Sorry, technology is great. One more time on chat. And I'm not seeing anything else. Scott, we appreciate you taking time from your evening tonight. With that, we look forward to catching you guys hopefully next week if you're interested in some cattle topics. And that will be with Dr. N.T. Cosby. And we'll see you guys soon.
Thank y'all.
Thanks, guys.